Good evening, friends, and welcome to the official YouTube channel of VS Strategic Business Consulting. In our series, In Conversation with a Thought Leader, today I would like to introduce our guest, Mr. Onyi. He is also referred as Mr. Distinction. So, Onyi is a UK-based global leadership speaker, futurist, and a corporate trainer. Through his message, Cutting Edge Distinction, Onyi trains, coaches, leaders, and organizations to build a purposeful organization and the life. Onyi's legacy and his life story is named as From Detention to Distinction. So now let's hear it from Mr. Distinction himself, Mr. Onyi Anyado. Uh, Welcome, Onyi, and thanks a lot for being a part of this series of In Conversation with a Thought Leader. And, I welcome you to the official YouTube channel of VS Strategic Business Consulting. Most welcome.
Thank you. Good day. Good day, Venkat. Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity and the introduction too.
Fantastic, fantastic. Onyi, I would like you to actually give a small briefing from your end about, who you are and from where you come and how did you become a leadership coach? Because that's going to be, we're going to go in detail about your legacy and the entire thing. But just I want to give a brief and hear a brief from your end,
Excellent. Thank you. So yes, I'm a UK-based global leadership speaker, corporate trainer, and futurist. So for my message of cutting edge distinction, I train and coach leaders how to lead with distinction in the 2020s and beyond. But I suppose we have to go back to the beginning. In the beginning, so I was born and raised in Hackney, East London. London, obviously the capital of England, and then there's 4 parts to London: North London, South London, East London, and West London. So I was born and raised in, East London to a 2.4 family, meaning my dad, my mum, my sister, and myself. Unfortunately, at a very early age, my dad left. I think when me and my sister was 7 or 8 or 8 or 9. And so for the majority of my childhood and my teenage years, it was just me, my mum, and my sister. So even though I was born and raised in the UK, but I'm come from a Nigerian background. So coming from a Nigerian background, my mum's very strict. So I had to be a doctor, a lawyer, or pharmacist, one of them 3 professions. So I went to, a pretty good school, St. Aloysius in North London. I went to Southgate College, which again is in North London. I studied management and marketing. That was good. That was coming of age. Then I got to university, Middlesex University, which is in Northwest London, and I studied management and marketing. So in Southgate College, I studied business studies, came out with a merit, and at Middlesex University, I studied management and marketing, and came out with I think I passed. And I really enjoyed Middlesex University. It was my first time. I came out as a man. I had so many friends. Growing up in East London, the majority, if not all, my friends were black. But coming to Middlesex University was so multicultural. I had white friends, Indian friends, Chinese friends, Turkish friends, all friends from around the world. Unfortunately, when I got to the second year of university, I dropped out because at the time I was the only one out of my friends to be living to be at university. So the second year of university, I dropped out and began living a particular life called the street life. Now in London, I know we've got an international audience, so I have to really break down particular statements or words. So the street life wasn't really gangs, but it was just young men on the streets of East London up to no good. Unfortunately, in that 10-year period, 6 of my friends got murdered. I nearly got shot dead. I went to prison twice, and I lived a life of no purpose. And I went to prison twice. Thankfully, it wasn't for nothing serious. It was just fighting, and both times fighting. So you can imagine, as a young man, no role models, no father figure, no purpose. But inside of me, I knew that I was better than the street life. I knew I was better than the shootouts. I didn't know what it was. So the latter days of living the street life, the only job I saw myself doing was becoming a counsellor in North London and looking to help people. And obviously, I've always had a passion for people, even as a young person. My mum used to be a nursery teacher, and during the summer holidays in the summer camp for children, I used to help my mum look after young children, even though I was young myself. So I've always had a passion to help young people, to help people. So I decided, okay, one day I'm going to be a counsellor working in North London. That was my dream. That was my purpose. On the 2nd of November 2008, I became a born again Christian, and my journey started from there. So I went back to college, or went to college, adult college, got my qualifications, level 1, level 2. And I thought, okay, I'm going to become a counsellor. But then I found out about life coaching. I went to do a 2-day training course, but obviously on the 3rd day, they sell you the package, which at the time was like £4,000. At the time, I didn't have £4 to my name, so I took a step of faith, launched my first business, and began doing monthly life coaching workshops called Your Time Is Now. Nobody came for like 6 months, even though hundreds of people registered on Facebook. And then I came up with a brand of Distinction, but it was just an evolution of my brand, which is now Cutting Edge Distinction. And then it was an evolution of my gifts, my talents, my passion. Came up with a brand of Distinction, pivoted about 4 years ago, and now I'm a UK-based global leadership speaker, corporate trainer, and futurist. And my life story, my legacy is titled From Detention to Distinction.
I don't know how to react to this. I think you have seen a lot of things in your life, and it's for people like me, it's an absolute inspiration for a person being, a street boy from there to becoming a leadership coach. I think there must have been a huge amount of thought process which you would have undergone and you would have processed during the days. Could you elaborate on why did you, name or coin your legacy as from detention to distinction? And I know it's a
Good question.
brand today, and I'm completely intrigued to ask this question and understand, because it is so touching. It's so touching. The sentence detention to distinction itself gives a plethora of things, so we can imagine and we can think a lot of things. But we would like to hear it from you. Why did you coin that?
Thank you. So in 2014, I done my first ever and my only thus far TEDx, and that was a
Uh-huh.
really great. That was a major platform, and I was actually going to call it from victim to visionary, from lifeless to life coach, and from doldrums to distinction. But I just got a creative idea, heavily inspiration, and I just said, okay, from detention to distinction. Obviously, detention, it's a prison, it's a lockdown, and its distinction is now living a life of legacy, a life of impact. But it's interesting that particularly when I'm coaching, whether it's organizations, young people, or adults, everyone has to go from detention to distinction. And some people's prison is fear. Some people's prison is lack of confidence, lack of vision. Some people's prison is, procrastination. So yeah, I mean, it was just the name of my TEDx, from detention to distinction. I realized it was short, it was catchy, it was depth, it was dimensional, and I think it's better than from lifeless to life coach, from excellence to endurance, and from whatever to whatever. So yeah, from detention to distinction. It was just an idea for my TEDx, and I ran with it.
Brilliant, brilliant, fantastic. Actually, the point what you mentioned, it reminds, of course, it's slightly a bit tangent, but it reminds me of Nelson Mandela, right? While he was released from the prison, he said, uh, unless I leave all the bitterness behind, I'll still be inside the prison and I'll not be able to do what is the purpose or
Yeah.
what is the goal of my life. And I think something similar, I found it what you were mentioning right now, coming from detention to distinction, and you want to get rid of all those things and then become a leadership coach. And today you're an influencer yourself. I'm sure you've influenced so many people. So unless you would have left that bitterness past, it probably would have been a big challenge. Oh, fantastic, fantastic. Now, I'm sure in this journey of yours, you would have faced a lot of challenges, a lot of ups and downs. There could have been situation where people probably would not have considered you or probably taken you seriously while you were discussing, while you were trying to share your teachings or your thoughts and your advices. What were the two major challenges that you faced, and how did you overcome that? What motivated you to actually move out of those challenges and do what you wanted to do and why you wanted to do? Please elaborate on that.
Fantastic question. Really brilliant question. So yeah, the two biggest hurdles, challenges, obstacles. Definitely the first one was patience. I realized that, they say patience is a virtue. I realized that now. I didn't realize it then, even as a journey, as a leader, as an entrepreneur, but patient. I had a big dream. I had a big vision. I saw the bigger picture, but I realized I didn't understand there was a process to go through it. And sometimes that process might take a year, 2 years. So yeah, the biggest challenge was definitely, or one of the biggest ones was patience. And the other one was definitely the financial side of it. Because after a while, you can have all the dreams, all the visions of the goals, all the aspirations, but if you haven't got money to pay for it, or money to live, or money to actually make even more impact, it's difficult. So you can imagine the combination of a lack of finances and a lack of patience. Oh my gosh. But then obviously I had to learn, I had to pivot, I had to agile, I had to strategize, and be patient too.
It's a deadly combination, patience and lack of money. I know, I can understand. But what motivated you? How did you overcome that?
Yeah, so time, so in regards to patience, I just had to overcome. When you see danger in front of you, it's only a fool that will keep on going forward. So I sat down, I strategized and realized, okay, before I can achieve a massive goal, let me achieve small goals. And when I was achieving small goals, I overcame my impatience because I realized I was still succeeding. And I got myself a part-time job. Then I realized I had money coming in. So yeah, that's how I overcame.
Fantastic, fantastic. So to address and to overcome your challenges, you did certain aspects which were probably not directly aligned to your overall purpose, but they became a catalyst which helped you in doing so. Brilliant, brilliant. Now, for every individual, right? For every individual, there should have been something or someone who would have inspired them. Who or what was your inspiration? And what are those qualities which inspires you as an individual? Because you have seen everything in your life, from one aspect, or the one aspect of it, the life, to the different aspect of it, from nothing to being an influencer, a huge influencer. In fact, we know your influence on LinkedIn, and your daily post, be it on LinkedIn or on Insta or on Facebook, the kind of points that you come out and the kind of phrases that you put are so intriguing. So what are those qualities that inspired you, or who was your inspiration? We would like to understand those aspects from you in elaboration, if possible, on.
Yes, thank you, Venkat. Yeah, so honestly, and people always ask me that question, and I have to be so honest. The
Uh-huh.
number one inspiration in my life, from the start to beginning to the future, is myself. Because I know where I came from. Only I can understand the pain, the shame, the tears, the fears, the anguish that I've gone through. Only I could see the future, see the bigger plan, see 2030 to 2040, 2020. So I was the biggest inspiration. When I wake up in the morning, and even though I'm not where I want to be, or even when I got evicted and I had to move back to my mum's house, I saw the bigger picture. So I knew that it wasn't just about me, myself, and I. It was actually about him, her, and them. So for me, going through the pain, going through the shame, I had to come out the other side knowing that I'm going to end up inspiring and coaching and inspiring and mentoring millions of people around the world. So the biggest inspiration was myself. No one else has gone through what I've gone through that I know personally. Yes, there are great people that's gone through what they've gone through, but I realized I had to become my number one inspiration. So if I focus on myself, I'm focused forward. If I start looking around for other people to inspire me, I may lose weight. So I was focused and realized that from detention to distinction, I haven't arrived. So it's a lifelong eternal journey. And it was the fact that some of the pain I've gone through, how so easily I overcame it, whether it was a lack of money, whether it's impatience, whether it's trying to build a brand, trying to build a business. So sometimes I wake up in the morning and I start laughing and I think, wow. And I speak to myself, I say, Onyi, you're a real inspiration, because man, you're going through some real wilderness period, some fire, some testing, some trials, but you don't know how to give up. And so if I don't know how to give up, I realize that resilience inside of me is what's pushing me on, knowing that's about living my legacy and leaving my legacy. So yes, the number one person was myself, and it's the fact that it's called from detention to distinction, and I haven't arrived. So that's my daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly push.
Oh my goodness. Amazing. Amazing. Oni, this actually, forced me to ask you a question. Being a leadership coach, now, what is leadership? How would you define leadership? And what are those qualities in a person which determines or which would help him to be growing into a leadership or becoming a leader? Could you elaborate on that? Probably take some examples from your end and explain us what is leadership and what is Oni's definition of leadership and who is a leader?
Fantastic. Good question. So I'll give three of my insights, my quotes, and I say them each twice so we can really break it down and understand it. So in regards to leadership, what is leadership? So I don't speak on leadership, I actually speak on cutting edge leadership. So in 2015, I said the following: leadership isn't about age, but leadership is about influence, impact, and inspiration. Leadership isn't about age, but rather leadership is about influence, impact, and inspiration. Number two, distinction in leadership isn't a mindset. Distinction in leadership is a state of mind. Distinction in leadership isn't a mindset. Distinction in leadership is a state of mind. And leadership isn't about me, myself, and I. Distinction in leadership is about him, her, and us. Distinction in leadership isn't about me, myself, and I. Distinction in leadership is about him, her, and us. So I've broken it down, I've given three definitions, but the characteristics of the 21st century leader, whether he or she is in an organization, running a business, in a high school, at home. So the number one thing is to be a future thinker. The future we're not thinking about has already started. The top three global firms, whether it's Amazon, Facebook, Google, IBM, whoever, these companies are not in 2020, they're 10, 15, even 20 years down the line. Apple's not working for 2020, they're already in 2035. So the first skill, the first characteristic of a leader has to be a future thinker. So if it's a person's a high school student, they've now got to start thinking about the future of work. What are the future jobs for the next 10, 15 years, and begin to pivot and align themselves. If the person is an entrepreneur, they now got to understand, okay, what's the market for the next 5 to 10 years? What are the global trends? And so that comes becoming a future thinker. So one, definitely a future thinker. Secondly, empathy. That's not particular order, but definitely empathy. We're now in a new norm. We're now in the era of creative distinction. The 2020s, I call the era of creative distinction. And there's so much uncertainty, so much unstability, so much fear out there. So as leaders, one of the skills you need to have is empathy. Understand people's fear, understand people's wants, understand people's lack of confidence, and then relate with yourself with them. So future thinking, empathy, I would say creative thinking, 110%. So for my message of creative distinction, of cutting edge distinction, I created the 3 C's of creative leadership: critical thinking, collaborative thinking, and creative thinking. Critical thinking, collaborative thinking, and creative thinking. So every leader has to be a creative thinker. Amazon, Facebook, Instagram, IBM, these started off as ideas, and over time they developed into value-driven and disruptive innovation. So I would say the three keys are future thinking, empathy, and be a creative thinker.
Amazing, amazing, beautiful. Now, specifically when we look into, uh, now that you have explained about the 3 C's as well as the importance of empathy, creative thinking, and it's not about me, myself, or it's about them and us, right? It reminds me of one specific quality which is described or which is detailed in almost all the leadership models and frameworks. I would like to understand from you, what is self-awareness? How would you define self-awareness, and what is its relevance in leadership? And it is, I feel it's one of the most critical quality or a trait, right? So we would like to understand. I'm sure it would be an amazing thing if you could elaborate with some examples, aligning it with your cutting edge distinction.
Excellent, fantastic question. So, in regards to self-awareness, I think for me, self-awareness comes from the three eyes of cutting edge leadership: your influence, your inspiration, and your impact. But the first person you have to influence, inspire, and impact is yourself. So you have to know and believe that you're a leader, because leadership isn't about age. So it's not about how old you are or how young you are, how long you've been in business or organization. It's about knowing that one, you're a leader and that you can continually and intentionally influence, impact, and inspire yourself. Self-awareness comes from celebrating your distinction, celebrating your difference, celebrating your, in fact, I did say you have to find your distinction in your distinction. So 110% is finding your distinction, who you are as an individual, and celebrating it. Nobody on planet Earth has a legacy or life story titled From Detention to Distinction. It's been hard, it's been very interesting, but I own it, I celebrate it, and it inspires other people. And that's where the self-awareness comes, because when you get your self-awareness, you make other people think, and they can become self-aware too. So that's like a domino effect.
Ah,
So self-awareness from understanding who you are, what you carry, and what your distinction is, celebrating your distinction. I'm a 6'3", slim black guy with an afro. That's my difference. But also I can also add to even more difference, and then also challenge other people to find their difference too. So yeah, self-awareness for me is understanding who you are, what you carry, and celebrating your distinction.
great. Now, I have a small query in this, so I wanted to ask you with that.
Yes.
Knowing who you are, or if in my case, if I want to know who I am, it becomes more of self assessment or self evaluation. How is it aligned or similar or a component of self awareness? And if it is different, can we know the difference?
So for me, I realize that now I'm a leadership speaker, futurist, and corporate trainer. So I understand my role, quote unquote, my title. But I realize it's actually more than a role and more than a title. It's actually who I am. It's my DNA. It makes who I am. It makes the fact that I'm an inspiration or influencer or I'm a blessing, whatever. So for me, it's that self-awareness. It's the same. It comes from the same school of thought, because if you don't know who you are, you've got nothing to offer. But once you know who you are and what you carry, you can offer everything. Nelson Mandela knew who he was. Gandhi knew who he was. Mother Teresa was self-aware what she carried and what her impact and what she had to do. So yeah, it definitely is self-awareness and that understanding and that belief as well, because you can believe that, okay, I'm a leader or I'm a coach or I'm a trainer, but if you don't actually believe it, then that self-awareness, people are going to realize that you're not actually confident, that you're just faking it until you make it. So it comes with that boldness. I think you have to understand that to be more self-aware comes with that boldness, not arrogance, but boldness that rubs off on other people to become even more bold.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks a lot. I think it was an amazing explanation. Now, I have one specific question. You called the year or the era of 2020s as the era of creative distinction, right? I've seen some of your posts, and during one of our interaction, you mentioned about this. In fact, I think there's some post today that you've posted on creative distinction. Can you elaborate on that and its relevance for leaders?
Excellent, brilliant, thank you. So yeah, so from 2017, 18, I began speaking and writing about creative distinction. I didn't really know, but because when I write and when I speak, I just get inspired and I just flow. So 2019, I realized that it's a new decade, but it's not just a new decade, it's going to be significant in more ways than one. And I realized that, yes, it's going to have to be now the era of creative distinction. And I mean, the two separate words mean so much, creative and distinction. They kind of speak for itself. So the reason why I called it, I realize now why I called the 2020s the era of creative distinction is, as we know in the world, the global market is now local and the local market has gone global. And there's such a push for AI, artificial intelligence, automation, and every other kind of AI, et cetera, banking, blockchain, et cetera. But also, let's not forget the human element of creative distinction. So yeah, we can have a blockchain, we can have automation, AI, etc., driverless cars. But let's not forget that every human being has the capacity to birth a creative idea, and not just a creative idea, a value-driven idea, which is cutting edge in nature and results. So I realized that the era of creative distinction is a challenge, is a call, is a charge for leaders around the world to rise up in creative distinction, and for people that don't even think themselves as leaders to rise up in leadership positions and birth creative ideas that bring value on local, national, and global platforms. So the era of creative distinction is for humans, leaders, to rise up and bring value-driven solutions locally, nationally, and internationally.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Fantastic. Now it actually gives a lot of relevance to the entire concept of your cutting edge distinction aspect. Thanks a lot for that. I have one question before we get into the concluding part. Uh, this is a random question because I was so interested and wanted to actually ask you this. Looking at your LinkedIn post today, you spoke about branding as one of the major distinctions. You said it's an idea of distinction, right? It's pretty interesting. It's pretty interesting. Can you please elaborate on that and how important is branding? And it will be great if you could actually, try to link that, how it can actually become a big influence and how it can help leaders.
Fantastic, brilliant. So in 2015, I came up with the idea or the definition of what branding is. So in 2015, stroke 16, I said, branding is not just a product, it's also a way of life, an idea. Branding is actually leadership. Branding is not just a product, it's also a way of life, an idea. Branding is actually leadership. So branding isn't the iPhone, branding isn't the car, it's not the watch, it's not the clothes, it's not the mobile phone, it's not the app. Branding is not just a product, it's also a way of life. Whose way of life? Your way of life. It's an idea. Whose idea? Your idea to bring change. Branding is actually leadership. So branding, why do people line up 7 days in the rain, the snow, and the sleet, or the sun for the latest iPhone? It's not just the product or the idea, they're actually buying into the vision, the values, and the voice of Steve Jobs. So I realized that for my message of cutting edge distinction, I had to find my distinction in my distinction. So I'm not a leadership speaker, I'm a leadership speaker, but I don't speak on leadership. I speak on cutting edge leadership. There's only one iPhone. There's only one Rolex, kind of Rolex. I mean, there's only one brand Rolex. So branding and distinction go hand in hand. That's why I said, dear leader, your brand is what would distinguish you. No brand, no distinction. So if you haven't got a clear defined brand, which is your vision, so I create for my message of cutting edge distinction, I created the 3 V's of leadership branding: your vision, your values, and your voice. So if your vision, your values, and your voice isn't easily recognized, respected, and regarded, you've got no brand. So why is Steve Jobs he's still speaking years after he's dead? We bought into his legacy, we bought into his brand, we bought into his values. So branding is not just a product, it's also a way of life, an idea. Branding is actually leadership.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Now it is so very clear what you actually meant on LinkedIn because it was so intriguing when I read the post and it is absolutely clear now. Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Oni. And before we conclude, I have one last question for you. Actually, this was not planned, but with your permission, I'm just going ahead with this question, right? You typically look at the business models and leadership models prior to this pandemic, right? It was all running as if it was pretty smooth and everything was fine. But one pandemic, it ensured the entire business model is questioned and it's challenged the survival of every institution or so-called the not legacy, but I would coin the practices, right? It affected the economies of not just one country, but the economies across the globe, Now, today, if we typically look at the the impact that it has on the overall well-being, happiness, and the economy of every country, it has have an impact. Now, no one is talking about anything else apart from how to get rid of this pandemic and get into normalcy. Now, tell me, leadership is all about future thinking. Leadership is all about being aware and being able to plan and be ready for those situations which are not in our control or which cannot be visualized. Now, just take an example, one network failure just at this moment, we lost our connection, right? Similarly, one pandemic, it created a mess. What would your advice and suggestion be for all those people who are aspiring to become future leaders in this era of 2020 and beyond, right? And what should entrepreneurs, the future entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs think and do while they plan, considering this? We would like to hear from specialists like you on leadership.
Yeah. So speaking from my own experience, when I started from nothing and now I'm here, definitely build your brand, build your brand, build your brand. Build your value, build your value, build your value. Position your brand value, position your brand value, position your brand value. So build your brand, build your value, position your brand, position your value. Simple. Because if you position your brand and value, somebody obviously is going to need what you want, whether it's online or offline. But if you've got no brand, if you've got no value, nobody's going to know you. I don't get hundreds of likes on my LinkedIn post, but hundreds of people over the last few months have been saying that their lives changed. They've seen a new understanding. So branding and value. Build a brand, build your value. Build your brand, build your value. Build your brand, build your value.
Fantastic, fantastic, and an amazing suggestion. Certainly, this session is going to be of a great help for all those people who are aspiring to be leaders or who are looking to build their legacy and build their brand. Thanks a lot, Oni, for accepting and obliging my request for this interview. It was an amazing discussion. Looking forward to more such sessions, and I really feel honored for this collaboration. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity. I really enjoyed it.